All right, just while we wait on people to file into the room, I'm Gary Dehart with Insightful Accountant. This is Kyle Turiff with Turiff or Turiff. How do you pronounce it?
Turiff.
Turiff. Okay.
Depends if you're using my Canadian accent or not.
Oh, right. And whether I'm in metric or standard.
Exactly.
And with RLB Digital, which is Kyle will tell more about himself, but it's the kind of tech arm of an accounting firm. So before I jump into the intro here, I always have a good question for you. You cheated since you sat in on the session yesterday. So you could have already, oh, sorry, my son's going to cut the lawn. So I don't know if you hear the lawnmower going back there, but I can't stop him. I can't stand in the way of that progress. But so let's see, what's another question? No, I'll give you that. What's your favorite city to visit?
If I said Las Vegas, I feel like I'd be judged. But I've recently been going to Boomer Technology Circles conferences in Kansas City. They just so happen to be in Kansas City. And I had never been there before. And I've kind of fallen in love with Kansas City. Just one of the best steaks I've ever had. They've got the ball games.
Right.
It seems like a great town.
I've actually, I don't think I've ever been to Kansas City. I've been to Kansas, but I don't know that I've ever been to Kansas City.
Barbecue,
Right.
Joe's barbecue. It's there's a couple, must-hit places there. So
Yeah. Well, and considering that almost every accounting conference is in Las Vegas, that's fair. I don't think anybody would be judging. So you can have two. We'll give you two. How about that?
Okay, perfect.
All right, I can do that. I am the host. All right, well, let's wrap this thing up. We're actually get this one started so we can wrap up Future Forward. So good afternoon. Thanks again for joining us for Insightful Accountant's Future Forward Summit. My name is Gary Dehart. I'm the publisher of Insightful Accountant and the host of the Accounting Insiders podcast, as well as the host of the Future Forward Summit. This is our closing session, and it is named Integrating Your Software and Applications. It's an intro to business process automation, and our speaker is Kyle Turiff with RLB Digital. I'll have Kyle introduce himself in a minute after I cover kind of these housekeeping items. So this session does qualify for CPE. You must be present for 50 minutes of the session, and you must answer the three polling questions that we will post throughout the session. If you meet both of these requirements, we will send you an email with a link to a survey. It's like 3 questions, maybe even only 2 questions. Answer that survey, and then we will send you your certificate. This may take us about 24 to 48 hours to get you that initial link. Just depends on kind of how quickly we can move. But give us 2 days. If you don't hear from us in 2 days, send me an email. I will drop my email into the chat once I turn this over to Kyle. The recording will be posted on our YouTube page. I will also put that link in the chat so that you will have that, but we will also email that to you within a couple of days as well. So in closing, so if you have any questions during the session, we do ask you to put them into the Q&A panel, and be sure to make a specific reference to the topic, since Kyle may not be able to answer the question right when you post it, and he may be on a different topic by the time we get to your question. So don't just put what did you mean by that? We're not going to know what you're talking about. So with that, always want to say thank you to our sponsor. This session is brought to you by Canopy. Canopy is the accounting practice management software that simplifies your firm so you can do what you do best, and that is help more clients. That is so simple. Well, again, I did this last time in their session. I'm going to read that one again. Canopy is the accounting practice management software that simplifies your firm so you can do what you do best, which is help more clients. Kyle, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Gary. Excited to get started. There's a question already, and yes, we can make the PowerPoint available. I'll make sure I give it to Gary and his team, and it can be part of a download or an email that goes out later. So a little bit more about me. Gary mentioned I lead the team at RLB Digital. RLB Digital is RLB Digital is the consulting arm of RLB Chartered Professional Accountants. We are a regional accounting firm in Canada. I manage the IT for the firm. We're about 200 people and have 5 offices. In that time, I had the opportunity to network with a lot of other firms in Canada and the US. I mentioned before earlier on the call through the Boomer Technology Circles. So I've had a lot of experience in the accounting industry and leading technology at accounting firms. I also helped launch our cloud accounting firm called Amplify, and now have launched and lead the team at RLB Digital. So who is RLB Digital? I mentioned we do IT consulting and process automation. To put it simply, we help businesses with IT strategy and automation. We advise on software stacks and build better workflows between them, getting more out of the tech that companies use every day. We started by doing a few projects for RLB clients, and now we offer our services to clients all over the US and Canada, not necessarily clients attached to the accounting firm. And with my background in the accounting industry, we do help a lot of bookkeeping and accounting firms with tech strategy and automation. So the agenda for the day, first of all, I want to kind of speak to this graphic because at the end of the day, this is the why we're looking at automation and efficiency. And I know some of it's a little bit obvious. Don't worry about the math here. The point is that the difference is in making slight improvements. So this is just something I stumbled across and it really, hit home with me. This is the difference between staying the same for 365 days, you're still at square one, versus if you make a 1% improvement every day for 365 days, you're at 37.5. That's just the way the math works out. But it shows the importance of continuous and nominal improvement. And when we're talking about trying to find efficiency in a process, that can be the difference if you're constantly, making these improvements. So today, the concepts are really going to be kind of introductory. So I want people to be comfortable with automation, and that's the objective. We're going to walk through some observations that we've made through the different projects we've worked on, bring together some best practices, which will include some example automations that we've done, some specific to accounting and bookkeeping firms, and that's usually the most popular part of the presentation, is talking about some of those ideas and getting a little bit of insight into what we've done in the past. And then some calls to action that you can hopefully take away from the session to get started and again, build that comfort level with automation. So the observation portions are what we're noticing in the space and setting the right starting point. The best practices will be what we've learned and what the main takeaways we've taken and the keys to success. And then of course, the calls to action is getting things started and hopefully being able to take that next step. Gary, before we start, did you want to do the sponsor poll or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that sponsor poll.
Okay. I think I missed that in the beginning. So
yeah, no worries. We talked about it before we started, and then we both forgot. So here we go.
So Canopy is asking, how many pieces of software is your firm currently using? I don't know if you really look at it, I know the answer for us, but
I'd hate to even try to come up with how many we use. All right, we'll leave this open. We only have 3 polls, so if you need CPE, you will need to answer this one way before we close out. So we'll go ahead and close it out in about 5 more seconds. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, thanks, Kyle.
No problem. So we can move on to observations. Bear with me. There we go. So the first observation is the 2 things we hear most often from clients. One being a better way. There has to be a better way to do this, and there's no coincidence that this is our tagline for RLB Digital. It's where all of our projects start. So when you're thinking of projects to automate or processes to automate, that banging the head on the desk, there's got to be a better way to do this, or I don't want to do this data entry. That's your flag. The other is finding where do we start or what's possible, and knowing where to start or what's possible. A lot of people have interest and desire, but this type of thing seems just out of reach. So the needing to marry what is the issue with what's possible or what software's out there, and coming to a session like today is probably a really good start. But in doing your research, it's hard to solve a problem and you don't even know what the possible solutions could be. So observation number 2, automation can be intimidating. So there's a lot of hesitation out there. So I find that with a lot of clients, especially when they're starting their journey, a lot gets lost in translation. Decisions like tackling tasks versus a process, where do humans get involved, or needing to make changes to a manual process first. Ultimately, automation is a form of delegation. It's the same answers to these what if questions. If you were to be delegating this to someone who's green, imagine you've hired a student that knows nothing. You need to give that level of detail and have the oversight into what's happening. So that level of detail, David Leary's session yesterday about documenting, that's exactly what we're talking about here, as well as over and above, if you have an automation, you want to have the oversights to cover those whatabouts, so that a human is watching what's happening, just like you were to delegate this to a new assistant. If you're in the hesitant camp here, if you're finding yourself in this spot, again, attending today is great. And again, my goal today is to bring that hesitation level down for you. So the lingo is a big one. When you're getting started, there's lots of language tossed around. So here are the basics. Getting the right understanding here is going to be key to starting your journey. So a lot of people know this one: SaaS, software as a service. Think QuickBooks Online or Dex. You're paying for the software as a monthly service or subscription. API. So an API is a mechanism that enables two pieces of software components to communicate with each other using a set of definitions or protocols that are kind of predefined. So when we're talking about an automation, a lot of you may have heard this piece of software has an API or has an open API. Open API just means that it's publicly available and not private. Some people really get confused and think it's got an open API, therefore I must be able to talk to every piece of the software, change every data point. That's not what open means. It just means it's publicly available. And then we get into low code and no code. So low code is a software development approach that allows any end user to really create an application. So it uses visual interfaces, some with simple logic, kind of drag and drop features, and enables people to kind of have rapid design and development and deployment of almost like applications, making it easier for non-tech users to create applications. And sometimes you need some help along the way. And that's kind of where we step in and help clients. Is somebody started something and they need to bring it across the finish line, we can step in and help. I skipped over triggers and actions there, though that's terminology when you are designing things in a piece of automation software, like I'm going to show you a little bit later. That's really the two. There's a trigger. If this happens, then I want this to happen. So there's usually one trigger, and then there can be multiple actions or branches off that, and that's what that means. Then RPA, this one gets tossed around a lot. So RPA stands for robotic process automation. It mimics and executes routines or rule-based tasks usually performed by humans. That's the Webster's dictionary. A lot of people use this for anything automation or done by a bot or computer, and that's fine too. It's most often associated with a desktop-like software or running like a macro in Excel, but ultimately it's any bot-style automation. And observation number 4 is the integration type. So it's important to understand that there's really 3 main types of an integration. Native integration or in-app is the built-in ability for the product to directly connect and interact with another application or service. So no need for a third party. You can get kind of stuck with a native integration, which I'm sure many of you on the call have. Maybe it's a one-way sync. It's not doing what you want, so it really can handcuff your workflow. And this is where we get a lot of the accounting crossover work gets referred to us. People want something to integrate into QuickBooks Online. They've hit the integrate button with a third-party vendor, and it's just, that's not what they want to happen. The second is a connector, and that's where we get mostly involved. And that's where we're talking about your journey is starting, is being able to utilize pre-built connectors with a third-party software. So a connector is a bridge between a product and another application or service, enabling the exchange or sync between the two. Connectors can be built in, or they're usually with a third party, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. And they help enhance the product's functions by integrating with one other software tool, or maybe multiple. It really allows a more customizability, which is why it's the natural next step of possible triggers and actions. Then there's custom API calls. So this is more possibilities open up if it's available in that app's API. Remember, open API doesn't mean anything. It has to be available within that application's API. But this has a lot more requires a lot more expertise and expense. So you really have to figure out if the juice is worth the squeeze on doing something custom. It's really a specifically crafted request and usually involves some sort of manual programming. And observation number 5 is the status quo will not scale for growth. So if you plan to grow, any waste in your processes will grow and bloat as well as you scale. So it's important that especially if you are looking for growth, is to really embrace that continuous improvement mindset. And that's why I put that graphic on the beginning slide. Waste happens in any process. So if it were physical, you could see it. This is something that really hit home for me when doing my Lean Six Sigma training. If it's physical, like if it's in a factory and you see the process, you really physically see the wasted time, energy, or wasted product. It's really hard to see that in kind of a knowledge base or an accounting firm. It's usually with somebody else, and the waste is a lot more ethereal. It's really hard to nail down. So it's important to really start to take a look at your processes and understand where the wasteful activities might happen. And finally, number 6 in the observations is who is helping you find a better way. Is it software vendors? Is it employees or people on your team? Is it friends or colleagues? Knowing the answer to this question is pretty key, and having the ability to have the ability to continually improve. You want to keep the perspectives and priorities in mind of these people. Vendors often are trying to sell you their piece of software, and it's either going to solve everything or it's not. But it's important to probably take in different perspectives, whether that's through kind of a trusted advisor or doing things like this to see what information's out there, and definitely demoing the product. And we're on to poll number 1, Gary. So our polls are quite simple, but where are you at with improving your workflows? Just looking to get an idea from the group where everybody's at. So I want to know more about automation. I have an idea of something I want to automate, I have built and I'm using a custom automation already, or I have a few custom automations and really want to crank it up. And I think we'll see the results of this one.
All right, we'll hold this open for about 5 more seconds, and then I will close it and share. So we'll get, if you need the CPE, don't forget to participate. So we'll close it in 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. And Kyle, I will also share the results of that first poll too. Somebody had requested that.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have about 40%. I want to know more about automation. So that's, we're in the 74% want to know more or haven't begun their journey yet. and it looks like, yeah, okay, 10% have one, and interestingly enough, 17% have a few automations and really want to crank it up, which is great. So looks like a pretty good spread across them, which is interesting.
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure if I'm trying to share your results. Nope, I'm not able to. Are you able to see that?
I'm able to see the results of our poll. So poll number 1.
Okay. Wow, that should be gone.
I can close it. I think we're okay.
So the canopy poll, just because somebody did ask about that, the answer. So how many pieces of software are you using? 8% were using less than 3, 50% were using 4 to 8, 25% were using 9 to 12, and 18% were using 12 plus. So sorry that I failed to share that the first time. Thanks.
Interesting, no problem. Okay, we're going to move on to the best practices section. So one of the things that I always try and start our projects out with is, are we automating a task or a process? And at the end of the day, we're most often automating a task. So it can get very daunting to think about automating an entire process. And process automation really isn't the right term. It is task automation. So zooming out leaves you paralyzed. You need to do this balancing act of what's your scope? If you look at things on like a process map, I've done this before, and I'll use it as kind of a tax process. If you look at like the e-signature portion, if you were to ask a partner of our firm, as an example, what is the personal tax process of the firm, and e-signature is sending for signature is a spot on that process map. If you were to ask one of our admin staff about the sending for signature, it's an entire process within itself. So whether you're zooming in and out on that process, you want to zoom in as far as you can to get the level of detail. You can't just automate e-signatures. You may be able to automate the email that requests the signature and then automate the document that comes back, as an example. So the zooming in and out and defining and compartmentalizing is really key to understanding before you get started. If any of you were on David Leary's session yesterday about documenting, he did do an automation at the end, which was sending a text reminder in his payroll automation. That's a perfect example of kind of zooming in on a very specific task, zoomed into payroll, and that was the task that was going to automate, not necessarily a process. So it was the process of notifications, but at the end of the day, that's a task. The identifying process changes. So one of the things that we do is try and have our accountants keep a wish list, and especially in tax season. So some of them say it's a little bit therapeutic, but they get to write down, I wish this would work better. I wish this could be automated. And at the end of the day, they've got to make that note, and we'll look at that. They can cross that off, or this was a terrible idea, I was having a bad day. We can look at that list at the end. So have somewhere where you can kind of note some of these things down, especially in your busiest times when you're getting the most frustrated. There's got to be a better way to work. Have a place where you can put that, go back and look at it later and decide, something that you're going to tackle. Best practice number 2 is finding quick wins. So I keep going back to that example of David's from yesterday, that text message. If you weren't on the call, it was basically sending a text reminder in the payroll process. That was a quick win. They had a process. There's one little tiny piece that was automated, but it helped. So finding those quick wins are especially the best place to get started. One of those is with forms. We're a big fan of trying to implement forms into things you do, especially on your automation journey. It's kind of controlling your front door in a sense of how you're getting information. I always come up with the example of my children's daycare. I wish they would hire us. I wish they used forms. I don't want to print out a Word document, fill it out, send it in, or send it back, or try and fill it out online. Just send me a form. That type of structured information is a lot easier to automate. The email address goes here, gets added to this list, signature here, that type of thing. So forms are always a great place to start. And then they flow into things like updating your contact info, data entry, reporting notifications. A more complex example of this, we custom built our personal tax organizer, and it flows from a form that is emailed out to all of our personal tax clients. They don't have to log in because we don't want them to have to remember a portal one time a year. There's family members, spouses. They don't go through our firm's portal for personal tax. They just get the form reminder. It's a lot more simple. And then we have some pretty complex things that happen in the background that auto flow the data and the submissions to our internal teams and folders, and then the right admins, things like that, get notified. So we've taken that form idea now, the estates from our firm. If we're filing an estate, those are pretty complex, and we do international returns as well, so they each have their forms. There's a question here about what software do we use for creating forms. We love Cognito Form. Another that I played with that has a lot of possibilities, Jotform. But I'm a big fan of Cognito Forms. It's fairly simple, but has some more complex needs, or sorry, some complex options to handle in the background, and it integrates with a lot of different things. You can always use Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, but they're very limiting. So if you want any type of complexity, they can get really tricky. So you quickly can outgrow a Microsoft or a Google Form, but they're free if you're in one of those universes. So it's a good place to start. Best practice number 3, the human touch. So I think a lot of people, especially in that hesitation bucket, think, well, I've automated this, what could go wrong? Knowing where the human touch is a huge part of implementation. Think of automation as an assistant, not a decision maker. So build in logs, notifications. These things shouldn't be hidden. Oftentimes, we automate things into our CRM system, but we don't just let the form automated into our CRM system, because what could go wrong? But it does go into a nice list with a button. So a human can say, that looks right, that looks complete, that looks reasonable, I'd like this to go to the CRM. So no dual data entry. It's sitting in an intermediary with a button. That's a little more manual, but it's a lot more of an elegant automation that a human gets to interact with. A couple questions coming in. How do you spell that? Cognito and Jotbot. So Cognito is right. Cognito, Cognito Forms. And the other one is Jotform, J-O-T form. Another question here. Have you found a good way to link data modeling to forms so you can do lookups in target data sources? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Sean, if you can, I'll just move on, and if I don't get to it, we can chat offline, or if you can frame it a different way for me. I just want to move on quickly. Best practice number 4, single source of truth. So which set of data do you trust? In large organizations, there can be those different pieces of software that Canopy was talking about. Obviously, if you're using Canopy is going to be your single source of truth, but oftentimes you see clients with QuickBooks or CRM, where's the right address is the easiest, simple example. What is your single source of truth, and are you pushing to it, or are you pulling from it, or both? Really understanding how that flows. You want to make sure you have a good structure to your data, that it's the same. The simplest thing I can think of is, we talked about forms. Some forms have a name field, but where your data is flowing wants a first name and a last name. Do you get tripped up there? Usually you can kind of code that in and make that change. But if you understand that from the get-go and you know what your North Star is, you can work back and say, hey, I need a first name and a last name. That's a very simplified way of just understanding how things need to be structured. And permissions and control. So understanding, this is more of a security thing, But if you do have a single source of truth, there you should really be thinking about who can make those changes. And that should be probably a little more locked down than the rest. And like I said, as an example of that button that was pushed in the list for our admin staff to add to our CRM, that only the admins of our firm can see that list. It's not willy-nilly who can just add it, and that's just another kind of form of control. And best practice number 5. So this is where you probably want to start your journey if you are looking to automate something. I know there was, I think it was 25 to 30% of you have started something. I'm assuming it's probably in one of these tools. And for the rest of you that are looking to get started, the real difference here is Zapier is ideal for simple and quick workflows. Zapier is great. I love it. That's where I started. With Make, formerly called Integromat, you can create more complex workflows without coding. So we are using a lot more Make now than Zapier. Not that Zapier can't do the job. We just happen to have a lot more flows in Make. So if we have a simple one in Zapier, we tend to just put it in Make so we have one less place to go. But we certainly have a lot of clients using Zapier. And again, one of my first ever automations was in Zapier. So Zapier is a really good place to start. And just as a side note, that's where we started with Insightful Accountant. Actually, we do an automation for them with pushing some information to a software vendor that they've asked us for some help for. So that's done via Zapier. And then Microsoft Power Automate is a lot more complex. Usually people are looking for help with that one. But it's the obvious choice if you're looking to do things within Microsoft. You can access some Microsoft 365 things like, an online Excel spreadsheet with Make or Zapier. But if you want things to really start to happen within the Microsoft universe, you're looking more at Power Automate. Oh, I think I just skipped back a bunch of slides, so bear with me. So there are, of course, others to this. There's a lot of vendors out there. There's ones that are become much more complex, but this is where the journey does start for most. And so best practice number 6 is R&D, so rip off and duplicate. There's a lot of information out there, people sharing different automations they've made. Make and Zapier have libraries, communities, posts about things they've done. Obviously, every business is different and their software stack is different. So what they're looking to connect or automate is always different, but there's usually somebody out there that is at least trying to connect the two things that you're trying to connect in some sort of similar fashion. Find a lookout and see ideas of what they've done. And I would like to share a couple of the ideas that we projects that we've worked on with you. So what you're seeing here is, some of you will recognize it, but it is the visual editor in Make. So these automations were done in Make, and these little modules and how they connect together is actually how you interface and build the automation in Make. And there's a lot more behind the scenes, but they make it really nice to see what's happening. So I'll explain this one a little bit. This is one we use internally at RLB Digital. So if you book a discovery call with us on our Calendly, we have this automation triggered. So it filters out any Calendly bookings that aren't the discovery call type in Calendly. And if you're not familiar with Calendly it's a calendar booking software. So you can see my calendar and book an introductory call with me. So when that call's scheduled, 4 things happen here. So OneNote, a new note gets added to a specific note of mine, a notebook of mine with some details about the client that they put in the form. We ask their email address, how can we help them, what size of business they are. That's all in my note in a template ready for my meeting. I really like that one. It's literally saves me 3 minutes. It's not that big of a deal, but knowing when I jump on a call, especially if I'm back to back, I've got a notepad set up for me with the client details ready to go for the meeting. That's great to use from my iPad. After that, a task gets added in Microsoft 365 Planner. We no longer use that. That is now happening in Notion. This is a bit of an old one, but it's really easy to update this automation and just have the tasks put into Notion. But if you're using Microsoft 365, we put a a task in the planner here that we need to follow up with the client and possibly do a proposal for them. Second one's really easy is MailChimp. So if they check the box in the meeting that asks, do you want to be added to our monthly newsletter, they get added to our MailChimp newsletter. We get a notification in Slack saying that somebody has booked a discovery call with us, and then with the location it came from, whether it's from the website or not. And just a fun little thing, there's usually a celebratory GIF that goes in the chat. It's usually something stupid, somebody dancing or something like that, because we've made a conversion on the website. And then we log that information in Airtable, just kind of a contact database of people who have booked calls with us. That also goes over to PandaDoc. So we set up the client in PandaDoc. So when I go to make a proposal for this client, their email address, name, and business is already in the software that I'm about to create the proposal for. So I don't have to create that contact in PandaDoc. And that's a really nice one. And then you see these ignores, they're just basically set up that if it's my email address, because I'm part of the meeting, to ignore me. So some of these ignore things are just really filters on how to ignore a piece of information you don't want to pay attention to. So we call that one the discovery call booking. And again, some administrative functions that happen if you book a meeting with us. Something very similar to that is the proposal acceptance. So again, it's PandaDoc. So it's watching PandaDoc. If someone were to sign off on a document, it can be a proposal. It could be any type of document that we're managing in PandaDoc. We again grab a GIF because we're silly, and we search for that document in PandaDoc, and we post both the signed document and the GIF into our Slack alerts channel, letting us know a client has signed the proposal and we're ready to get to work. We also update a couple tasks in Planner here. Again, we're now using Notion, but we have a lot more tasks to do for the client. This is usually just the getting started templated stuff that we want to get in there, like adding reminders to send them an invoice, all that fun stuff, getting more information from the client. And then we update the Airtable record that we created in the previous one with the signed PandaDoc document, just so we have record of their signed document right in their contact in our Airtable database. So that's the proposal acceptance. So those are two pieces of kind of the same workflow, but there's obviously a lot that goes in between setting the meeting, getting things scoped out, but I wanted some things kicked off once the proposal was signed. So those are two ones we use internally. This one is a form submission, and it uses Cognito Forms, which I mentioned earlier, and Box.com. This is I kind of mentioned our personal tax planner organizer. This is the first iteration of that. It's changed since then, but you can see how kind of the complexity can start to branch, doing different things based on different variables. But at the end of the day, we're looking for a form submission from Cognito, and we're moving files around in Box and sending notifications to the right team based on the form information. And then you can see notifications in Slack as well, logging some of that information. And then one of my favorites is this is how super simple you can get. I've done this webinar before for our clients. And when we were looking at who was signing up for the webinar, I just wanted to know. So I didn't want to have to log into Zoom to know who was signing up for my webinar. So I thought, hey, it would be great to get into our Slack alerts channel just every time somebody signed up for the webinar. And selfishly, I went and added that person to LinkedIn because I knew they were interested in what we had going on. So I made a connection on LinkedIn. So I didn't automate that because I don't think that becomes a little tricky. And I don't think LinkedIn likes that. But I got a Slack message with their information. Let me know, hey, somebody signed up for your webinar. It's a one-step automation that wasn't available to me in Zoom. So I built this really quick notification in Make. We have a question. What pushed your team to choosing Panda versus Ignition? So that is a great question. I love Practice Ignition. I love the team at Practice Ignition. I've known them for years. We were a client of Practice Ignition's 6 or 7 years ago with Amplify. For me, I was because we're techie, we were kind of able to create more customization in PandaDoc and do a lot of what Ignition was doing for us. So the really more customization on making the documents the way we wanted and our proposals the way we wanted. The reoccurring creates a lot more work. Ignition really is a lot less administration for that. You have to integrate it with Stripe and do reoccurring payments. But for simple document creation and grabbing the signature, I really liked PandaDoc, and then I knew I could integrate on top of it. So I just tried out PandaDoc and kind of fell in love when we started RLB Digital. That's the easiest way I can kind of put that. And we do a lot of project work. So I think Ignition really great for the reoccurring stuff, because the nature of our business is really more heavily project scoped. I like the customizability of something different. Hopefully that helps. I want to go back just a second. Just some other examples before we move on include custom performance reviews. So instead of needing to buy, HR software to do performance reviews for, your firm, or maybe you have a small team and you want some types of 360 feedback. What is that other than really a custom form to fill out and then being able to compile that into a report later? The compilation can get complicated to try and put all of those answers into a nice report for one individual, but we automated that for multiple clients and helping them with a performance review process. And we do that for our 200-person firm is run through a custom performance review process. Things like calendar bookings, like I showed, we have a client more recently that we have done custom receipts from Stripe from, so they wanted something different from Stripe, the nice logo. So we interrupt the Stripe transaction and email their customer a PDF that the client wanted their customers to get. And obviously bookkeeping transactions, things like that, running, creating invoices based on a Google Sheet. That was one of the first automations we did. Was a client really ran all their invoicing out of Google Sheet. They wanted to do it that way for whatever reason. And there was a button in Google Sheets that just made that an invoice in QuickBooks. We'll move on to calls to action. So the first one is pick your quick win. I keep going back to David's session yesterday. I really like that text message one. It's finding something in what you're already doing without needing to change the world. What's something you wish would happen? And I think that's going to be our last poll question today is there something you would like to happen at the push of a button? Try and come up with that answer. Or even find, for those of you that already have some automations, is there something you wish within that automation that would work better, or that you can improve, or really what's next? Keep it simple. Especially if you're just getting started, I think avoid anything that's customer facing. That takes so much of the pressure off of things. The first two examples I shared with you were triggered by our clients, but our clients would never see anything that it was doing. It wasn't sending them any emails. It was sending our team an internal notification, moving some things around for us. But I didn't have to have that, especially when you're starting out, have that anxiety around, what's going to happen to, with our client relationships, or am I going to embarrass ourselves or something like that? Avoid anything that's customer facing at first will help you gain that confidence. And in the end, it doesn't even have to be useful. So if you're just playing around, just pick something. I mean, log an email to a spreadsheet that, it has really no purpose at all. It's okay to start really simple, and it doesn't need to be of use to anybody if you just think it's neat. Every time I push a button, send a GIF to Joe. It can be silly, but you learned along the way. And I would really encourage you to do that. Second is to really find out if your tools can talk. Okay, so can't automate something if they don't have an open API. This is where the SaaS tools really start to shine. So what tools are going to be involved in your automation? Are you using some sort of third party, or do you need something like a list or an Airtable for things to sit as an intermediary? You want to do or have a technology assessment to make sure your your apps can talk together. I think if you're trying to make some software decisions into the future, it's important to have a roadmap of, you're not going to change all the software you're using in your firm in one day, but as you change it over year or years, that you kind of have a North Star to go to, that you know that they're all eventually going to work together, or allow you at least the opportunity to start integrating them better. Understanding if you're using the native integration versus the connector, which we talked about previously, and then what tool you're going to use, Zapier Make, Power Automate, and remember that Google and YouTube are your friend. Tons of information out there of people that have done this before. Don't be afraid. Great question. What is Airtable has come in, and I sometimes just assume everybody knows what I know, and I apologize for that. Airtable is a software as a service. Essentially, it is a database application. So think it's in between like an actual database and an Excel spreadsheet. It's a relational database that has a much easier interface for end users, and people like us will use Airtable as an intermediary because it has more functionality and reliability than Excel, because it's more built like a database. But it does have some viable uses. If you're an Excel whiz, I would encourage you to check out Airtable and see what you think. It is different. It's not meant to be a spreadsheet, but it is meant to be a database. So if you're pushing the limits of Excel as a database, I'd encourage you to look at Airtable. It has a lot more connectivity applications. As an example, you can store a file in Airtable in a record, which you can't do in Excel. Call to action number 3 is deciding if you're going to choose to DIY this, delegate, or hire. It really depends where you're at. There's no right answer. It's what you're comfortable with. I'm encouraging you to at least try to DIY so you understand, but there's nothing wrong with knowing you want to automate something and hiring it out. And that's obviously basically our whole business. So I'm going to say that. But sometimes there's usually somebody within your firm to delegate. And that's how I got started, is because our firm wanted this to happen. I just happened to be the person that was sitting there ready and willing to try something like this. You want to fully understand the requirements before you make that decision. How complex is what you're trying to do? And a simple task can still have complexity. Just because it's a simple one-to-one integration, there can be a lot of complexity in the data and how things are moving. So it's not always as simple as somebody might make it sound. And then who will maintain it? Who will notice if it's not working anymore? And then who will jump in to fix it? Really important, obviously, especially if it's client facing or something that's high volume. A lot of people, you set these up and it's not a set and forget. You really want to know who's going to maintain this. I got a couple of questions in here. I'll address them first. So how does Airtable compare to Microsoft Access? Similar idea, but SaaS are totally different. I don't have a ton of experience with Microsoft Access. It was a long time ago since I've used it. Similar concept, you're right. As with anything, probably Microsoft, it's 70% or 80% of what you want it to be, where Airtable for that type of tool is more of like a best in class. Smart Suite is a competitor to Airtable, if that helps people. But yeah, Airtable, again, it is a database like Access, but a little more, it's new, it's modern, has a probably more usable interface, less of a steep learning curve, and more connectability is the best way I can put it. Do you use a separate platform for process mining metrics or mapping visuals aside from Make or Zapier? Sorry, things are just coming in fast here. So we don't necessarily use anything different for process mining metrics. Once it's in Make or Zapier, we do get some metrics on it. But for process mapping, yes, we do use internally. It's the Microsoft tool, and I'm blanking on it. But there is a Microsoft kind of mapping tool that comes with Microsoft 365. And if I think of it, I will certainly let you know. And the other is Miro. So if I'm doing a Lean Six Sigma process improvement with a firm, Oftentimes we'll be working in something called Miro, M-I-R-O. It's a whiteboarding software that's really good for process mapping and allows different people to be on the board at the same time. So when we're drawing out a process, it's often in Miro. Visio, thank you, Sean. Visio is the Microsoft tool. And Lori, thank you. And Melanie asks, can you clarify the difference between Make and Zapier? It's really difficult to clarify the difference. I would just say Make has a little more capabilities and our developers seem to like it more, so that's where we lean. Zapier is a better place to get started, and they both have really different interfaces with how they work. So some of it's personal preference, and then some of it's slight technical preference when you get to being a little more complex on how things run and fix things. So there are differences. They are slight. If you're just getting started, I'm going to recommend Zapier. All right, we're on call to action number 4. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I think we're getting there. So just start. The biggest hurdle in learning the basics is just getting started. Creating your Zapier account, finding that something simple to just automate, just do it. And if nobody else knows, just try something. What's the worst thing that can happen? Start with something useless if you need to. It takes the pressure off, and ask for help and share your ideas. So don't be afraid to ask for help and ideas. If you have any ideas of something you like to automate, I'm going to share my LinkedIn. I think it was on one of the slides. If not, it's coming up. I'm happy on there, especially, send me a message or create a post or tag me in a post of your ideas of what you'd like to automate. And I'm happy to just kind of jump in and help on a conversation to just share ideas of something to automate, knowing with what, 2 pieces of software you're looking to talk about. And we're at poll number 2. And I think we're getting close to the end here, but what would you like to happen at the push of a button? Gary, if you could throw the poll up.
I'm trying to.
Yep.
And, still sharing the old one, apparently. All right, here we go.
So this is more asking, is there something specific that you have that you'd like to happen at the push of a button? This applies to the people that are already have an automation, or those that are just getting started. Is there something out there that you could see?
All right, we'll hold this open for about 5 more seconds, and then we will close it and share it. All right, 3, 2, and 1.
Okay, that's about average what we see. So 67%, yes, there's something out there that they like to see happen at the push of a button, and 33% no, which is fair enough. I think there's people out there that don't, maybe it's harder to visualize, or there's people that just don't want to have something automated, and fair enough. Some people are restricted by, and firms are restricted by the types of software they're using as well. So interested to know why the no's are out there, but probably going to take more time than we have today. Got a couple questions in, but thank you, everybody. That is it. I knew I was getting to the end, and I'll run through a couple of the questions that are in the chat, and feel free to post any more in there if they come up. We've got another 5 minutes or so. So Sean, you clarified the question by adding on basically how to avoid duplicates when adding form data like a new client to a CRM system. It really depends on the CRM system and the way it's connected. I hate to give the accountant lawyer answer of it depends, but it does. Usually a CRM system will have some sort of unique identifier, whether it's normally like the email, right? Why do you have 2 different emails for the same client? Or if there's a client and then like a sub company or something like that, it knows how to handle it. So usually the CRM itself will throw an error, just like it would throw an error if I was manually inputting it, and then the the automation just wouldn't run. So part of that is having some error handling in your automation so that it doesn't stop, so that 5 minutes later, something else needs to go in, but the automation is just blown up and not working. So it's more about having, I'm not so worried about adding the duplicates because usually that's built into the CRM, but it's more about how to handle once the CRM throws an error that the automation can still run, and maybe even notifying or logging what's happened and why. The other thing we do at times is we've built some smart reports into something like a CRM that's doing some data validation by a human. So saying, here's everything that was actually entered this month. Can a human quickly look at this report and they know what they're looking for? So I found that successful in doing, especially high volume tasks, doing some sort of data validation reports, like, can we run a report of every client that was entered this month that is missing the address? Therefore, because it's not required in the CRM, but we want it. So let's run that report and then go from there. Hopefully that answers the question, Sean. And if not, happy to chat further. Okay, I want to track my phone call time, my email time, time spent in software that's not tracked in Google, etc. Okay, that's interesting. I think there are some applications out there. I'd have to do some research, but I think there are some apps out there that can help you. You might need the combination of the two, but it'd be interesting to actually, if you did have a couple different systems like Google or something that were tracking that and combining those into a single source of truth or database to run your report, and that the automation of that would be very, very interesting. So yeah, there are some apps out there, Wendy, that can help. And if you want to chat offline, I can help with that. Keith's asking about poll 3. Technically, there were 3 polls. Sorry, there's the first vendor poll and then our 2 polls. You mentioned you're sharing your LinkedIn. There it is. So QR code you could scan with the camera app on your phone. Just take your camera out, hover over that QR code, and it'll take you right to my LinkedIn page. And happy to connect with anybody that's on the call and let me know what you thought about the webinar today. Okay, last question. Do you have a preferred, oh, there's way more questions. Sorry. Do you have a preferred software solution for automation around generating or at least receiving leads and nurturing them up to a point where they can actually book an initial concept? Or do you prefer multiple softwares that you build in these automations with? The one I've used personally for this is HubSpot. I know that HubSpot as a CRM can do some built-in automations around, it can, depending on the modules, and get quite expensive, but there is a free version of HubSpot to get you started. And you kind of mentioned, do you prefer multiple softwares that you build these automations with? I'm right now doing kind of the multiple because twofold. It allows me to learn a little bit more about different pieces of software, so that's beneficial to me, and I just like it. So if I were to, off the top of my head, I know there's lots out there that do that, Lori, but HubSpot would be where I started if you haven't looked at it before. Miriam asked, what kind of things do you use Airtable for? So interesting. I started using Airtable as just my contact list, people I knew that were interested in the services we were providing, just because I knew I could add files to it and attach different things and track maybe where my referrals came from. And it was a lot easier than trying to build drop downs and things in Excel. I just could do it a lot faster. That's a very base level thing to use Airtable for, and Airtable is almost too powerful for that. I'll give a quick example. Our firm ran a Halloween contest and we built the app with Airtable as the back end. So people could submit pictures. We built a little front end web app. You could submit the pictures of your desk decorated or the pumpkin you carved, things like that. And then they could be upvoted by different people in the firm. We used Airtable as our database to build this little web app, and without needing to really code or build a large app. That's probably the best example I could give off the top of my head. I would love to find out if time can be tracked better in all these circumstances. For example, when I'm running back and forth between 2 or 3 clients, I usually say, yeah, that's going to be tricky, Wendy. I think you're talking about tracking time across all your different apps. What program can know what client you're working on gets really tricky because you're in different programs. But that's a question a lot of our accountants are having. So happy to chat about that as well if I can maybe at least help get you started on something. So I think I've answered everything, Gary. If there's anything I've missed, I know we're at 4:30, so I apologize. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has beyond the session. My email's on the screen, our website's on the screen, or like I said, connect on LinkedIn, and happy to chat with anybody that's on the call today.
Great. I certainly appreciate it, Kyle. One question, actually, I had two things I wanted to ask you about. One, you said R&D. What was it? Rip off and what?
Rip off and duplicate.
Rip off and duplicate. I've not heard that before. That's funny. I like that.
Yeah.
And the other thing, because I've been kind of fooling around with some automations for us as well. And one thing you said that I want to say again and really highlight, is that having kind of done just a little bit of testing, right? Kind of like you said, just try it, right? Get in there and start poking around. Probably won't break anything that's too important. But I like that zoom in and that it's task automation. And I think if we can reframe what we're thinking, because when you sit down, you go, oh, I want it to do, this, that, and the other thing, and then these three things, and you start trying to figure all that out. It's certainly on the first time you sit down to do it, you walk away. Like, I can't figure this out, it's too difficult. But if I can accomplish a task and then figure out how to accomplish that follow-up task and that next task, makes it much more doable and probably a much better learning experience for each individual. So I'm going to take that advice and zoom in and just look at a task and see how I can solve one task, even as you were talking, just because all of our webinars, all of these people need to be pushed into our database, right, into our CRM.
Yeah.
We have a Zapier account. I don't believe we're doing that. I think we did at one point, but I think it may have broke, but and never fixed it. So, but certainly appreciate all the information you shared. If you didn't get this through what Kyle said, he's very available to talk to you and to share ideas. So reach out to him on these many different ways that he's provided that you can do that. Certainly appreciate everybody taking some time to be with us this afternoon. And if you were in other sessions, we certainly appreciate that as well. This will wrap up our Future Forward for May of 2023. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.